Well, certainly a spectrum of rituals.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is I don't know personally. Like in this book, the Brian Hayden thing, he writes about all this different evidence of secret societies. He's also not saying that they all practice terror, the aesthetics of terror. But he's saying that generally they do, that it's pretty consistent. So the use of violence is pretty consistent. But they also have the dances and the drumming and the ritual and all the rest of it. So I don't personally know if you can uncouple them or not. It's back to the imagination a bit, isn't it? It's like if you liberate your imagination using certain methods, like heroin would be a really easy example, alcohol, even more common one. If you liberate your imagination through alcohol, good, you've liberated it, but you become an alcoholic. So what about if you do it through movies? Well, I've written a book about that. Doesn't end well. What about if you do it through drum circles? Question, right?
Right.
That's the question. Is it? I mean, I got nothing against drum circles. I think they've become all new agey and Burning Manny, so that's kind of my point. But in essence, yeah, why the hell not? What could be more innocent than that? It seems like, and certainly dancing. It's very hard for me to reconcile, actually, my view, what I've observed, and the evidence I found for how pernicious or toxic culture is. When I refer back to my own experiences individually, so many of them seem positive around dancing or even clubs, or not so much that, but even drugs. And I've had so many positive experiences, and yet the accumulated effect of them was negative. Right? I ended up coming off the rails and killing a cat practically, and attacking a woman, and I probably have to edit that out because it's without context. It's going to sound like I'm George Hodel, but they were, I hasten to add, they were relatively mild, but they were still evidence that I was having a psychotic break. And derangement, ego inflated derangement, etc. Right? Anyway, the longer version of that, because I've testified about it in many different places. So, but that is confusing. It's like these things, in the right context and in the right dosage, can be positive,
can be healthy.
Can be healthy.
Yeah.
But of course, we're absolutely suffused in them. So we're just constantly being stimulated by these things, and that's the homeopathic analogy, isn't it? They're poison. They're only healthy because they're poisonous, and therefore that's absolutely dependent on the dosage being very, very small.
Yeah. Well, and now the 21st century is connected us in a ways that is so extreme that it we really are just consuming content all the time, even if it's as benign as Twitter, but I mean, now social media probably triggers more poison than traditional media.
Well, that's true, but I think part of that is that we've been colonized by the culture. We've been filled up over the generations with so much cultural waste, which is itself is toxic waste of people like Hodel or Crowley or Hubbard or etc. That we're now full to the brim, and that's coincident with being given the means to start spewing it around. Well, I think it's closing down. I think that's the end game, really, isn't it? Is to create a culture that's so pervasive and insidious, and that is so internalized that eventually there's no part of our being, our bodies or our psyches, that isn't colonized, and therefore there's going to be no chink of light. There's going to be no access to the natural transmission of life. If this system that we're embedded in now is on this Ariamanic curve towards total crystallization as this kind of externalized shadow prison matrix, then how would one continue to communicate or convey one's messages without using it, right? Currently I am, because I'm still trying to make connections while there's still enough freedom to do that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that I'm giving myself a you know, a T minus 10 years kind of self-detonate date where I'm just going to shut everything down. It just seems as though at some point that's going to have to be the development. I mean, the zombies are going to start, roaming the virtual realm, if not the natural realm. They already are, actually.
Yeah.
So we're actually dodging zombies all the time, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely.
When we use this media. There's that thing that, what's his name, Gibson said about the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
And I think distribution is really a key question here. And I think it's back to the point I wanted to get back to, which we didn't ever really finish, which is, what's going on in Hollywood in terms of the secret rituals of Hollywood, and how when they come to light, we're sort of like, well, everybody already knew that, but now it's different. Now somehow it's being acknowledged. Well, it's being distributed more, but it was already there. And I think part of central to the strategy of distribution is you've got to start, if you want to create the future, you seed it strategically, and so you distribute it in a way that it's invisible, right? And then gradually I suppose it replicates itself through mimesis, but anyway, gradually it becomes more and more visible. But because of that gradual distribution, we don't see it. We don't actually see it, that we're actually in this sci-fi future world already.
Right, because it's so incremental. It's like you don't see yourself age until you look at a picture from 5 years ago.
Like, exactly. Yeah, and it's being internalized. I mean, the aging too. You're looking at your aged self with eyes that are aged, so they're going to see it differently than if you were to see yourself with the mind of a 20-year-old at 50. Obviously, you'd have a different reaction, but you've aged internally as well. So culture as well. The Ahrimanic distribution program is central to that. Is that it's internally, it's colonizing us. As it gets distributed externally, we're not going to see it because we're of it. We are it. Like, people don't see everyone else using cell phones because they're staring at their cell phone.
Looking at their own cell phone, yeah.
They're doubly blind. A, they're not looking, and B, it doesn't look odd anyway because they're doing it too.
Hollywood is just like, it's almost an archetype, isn't it, in itself?
Hollywood, yeah.
The imagination factory,
The holy wood suggests a forest, actually, that is sacred, and a forest is something you get lost in.
Right.
In a lot of the myths, anyway. And George Hodel, I mean, the common theme I've been tracking in this book, George Hodel, through Roman Polanski to Charles Manson, through Alfred Hitchcock, John Huston, is torture the women.
Yeah.
But it
taps into however you would kind of characterize 20th century misogyny,
and the destruction of nature.
Right.
Destroy the female body is an attempt
to
destroy nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yes, there is definitely something there that generally sociopathic murderers seem to be male. Of course, that is largely been spun anyway with serial killers and psyops and all that. So it is muddy. I think that women, mothers who are abusive to their children, and sexually or otherwise, is far more common than is suspected, and probably as common as men who abuse their children. And
Indeed.
Somehow that's been suppressed in our culture as part of the deification of women, or the idealization of women, which is weirdly compensatory for the demonization of them and the brutalization of them.
Right.
It's the same with the Native Americans, right? You kill them, but you also romanticize them. Beware of anyone who romanticizes anything, because he's probably killing it secretly, or he plans to, later on. Because Of course,
well,
if
because you're fetishizing it, right? And that's
yeah, and then you want to eat it and you want to destroy it. And it makes sense. If you want to have a high of committing a taboo act, first of all, you make the thing sacred that you're going to violate.
right.
I think
That back to the ritual. That's what a ritual is about, right?
yeah, that's right. This correlation between the taboo. The taboo is either something that's forbidden because it's dangerous and harmful, or because it's sacred. And so, and there's this overlap between proximity to the sacred is dangerous, can be destructive. So then I think maybe some of these people we're talking about, and maybe it's in the whole culture now, is to flip that and to assume, well, because some cats are black, then anything that's black's a cat, kind of logic, as in if getting too close to the sacred is dangerous and destructive, then being destructive will get me close to the sacred. So then they're being programmed to accept something on a theoretical basis that it's liberating them, but from what? Well, some taboos are unnecessary and outmoded, no doubt, but some aren't. So the surrealist and the Arto thing was, and Crowley and so on, what we're talking about here, was about getting rid of all the taboos, transcending all the taboos, which only makes sense in the context of a non-community based philosophy, because we have to have taboos about killing and raping each other to live together in a community. The mistake that I made, and that many people make, is that agents of propaganda are different from artists. And we've got, yeah, okay, Hollywood is propaganda machine, but there are good artists working within it. No, the good artists are the best agents of propaganda. They're the ones who really know how to perfect the science of propaganda. Include Hitchcock in this. Hitchcock had this dream that we'd all eventually be just hooked up electronically to the media so that our brains could be directly manipulated, right? So that's Hitchcock. We know where his standard lies: total manipulation of the psyche of the audience. Well, that's what Fincher and Astor are masters of. And it does, as you say, it goes back to a tradition. Well, I would say it goes back prehistorically. This is the amazing discovery, really, although in a way it's not surprising. I mean, in a way I already knew this, but to find that there's a good, strong research base to argue this, it goes back to prehistorical secret societies. But obviously I can't map that whole thing, but we can certainly map it back, as Rash does, to surrealism and Artaud and the theater of cruelty.
The whole notion of Satanism being benign, it's like, well, then why would you even call yourself Satanist? Like, which I do, it's like a good question, it's, I mean, I get the reason if you're just trying to be like, contrarian and sort of nihilist about that, but it is weird to like adopt if it's imagination, you can adopt any model. Why are you choosing that one? I mean, that's like,
yeah, well, it's the bottom of the barrel, isn't it, culturally speaking?
I mean, it's like there's so many more, I don't know, of all things, like, really.
But isn't that it? They're trying to reject the patriarchy, among other things, and so they want to go to the symbol and the ideology that they think is the furthest. It's so ironic, isn't it? They think it's the furthest from the dominant culture. In fact, it is the capstone of the pyramid of the dominant culture.
All of the dominant culture from it seems like the beginning. I mean, the more I dig into this, it's just like every origin of intellect and science and art is some kind of devil figure. It's wild. Like, and at least in Western and Near Eastern, like, myths and belief structures, it really does feel that way. Like, I
think it's because it's the original God form. Actually, if you make God visible, it becomes the devil, because you're imposing the delusion, the trauma-generated delusion of being an individual, separate individual, onto the divine. So, and you think you're creating God, but it's the devil, right? So then that's the secret of the sacred, the secret function of the sacred is to
try to run back what you just said again.
Process.